Okay, let's dive in. Let's kick things off with Gwyneth Paltrow. Gwyneth Paltrow, the queen of goop, the queen of the candles that smell like vaginas, but the really good ones, and not the not good ones, but the ones that smell like what you want your living room to smell like. So, send it to Daryl. Last week, they kicked off her trial, which is about regarding a ski collision that happened back in 2016. Yes, this is over a collision that happened 7 years ago, or over 7 years ago at this point. It has now gone to trial. Mr. Sanderson, Terry Sanderson, is a retired optometrist. He's now suing Gwyneth Paltrow. He tried to sue the ski resort. That didn't go anywhere, so now he's here at a jury trial trying to sue Gwyneth Paltrow. The jury will make a decision this week in terms of who they think is liable for the negligence that occurred on the ski slopes that day in Utah. The judge will then determine what the damages will be due are. Terry Sanderson is suing for just over $3 million, and Gwyneth Paltrow is suing for $1 plus attorney's fees. So, like I said, this is all set to wrap up by Thursday at the latest Friday, but it looks like the judge is really pushing to have this wrapped up by Thursday, which is tomorrow. So hopefully we'll have a good update by our Thursday Night Live. Hopefully there'll be some closure to all of this drama. So Gwyneth's kids were also set to testify this week, but because testimonies were running a little long, which Owens, Gwyneth Paltrow's attorney, has not stopped complaining about how this is ruining his time. And Owens is like a piece of work. If anybody caught the Amber Heard Johnny Depp trial, then you'll know that Elaine was a piece of work on Amber Heard's team, but like here, Owens is just like the most annoying person ever. He has co-counsel James, and James is like popping off right now. What's James Egan? He's the other attorney working on the Gwyneth Paltrow case. And he's not only a cutie patootie, he's only 34. Trust me and the internet sleuths did a little digging because he's a cutie patootie and he was doing a little bend and snap in court this week. But it's funny because they found out that he's also, or like used to be a singer, a composer, a musician back in the day. So we dug up some of his songs on Apple and on Spotify. It looks like the last of his music was released in 2017. And since then, he's decided to just pursue being an attorney full-time and representing Gwyneth Paltrow in court. But I like James because he asked very good questions. He's very clear in his cross-examinations. He's very clear when he has witnesses on the stand. So he's been really good. Owens has been annoying, and he has a fucking mask on in court. And I'm just like, oh my God. Like, because he takes it off and on and off and on. And it's just like, he's just the most dramatic person ever. And I'm not living for Owens, but the internet and I are definitely living for James. So I highly recommend, if you want to catch up on the last bits of it, tune into Emily D. Baker. But I'll recap what we got so far on Monday and Tuesday. So Monday, we saw Mr. Terry Sanderson, who is the plaintiff suing Gwyneth Paltrow. He finally took the stand and gave us what he remembers happening that day. And he is very clear. He is loud and clear that he was on the slopes, and coming from behind him, he heard this loud, horrific, it was like this terrifying scream, as if somebody had just recklessly lost control, and then boom, he'd never heard this scream before in his life. It was like nothing he'd ever heard, right? And then all of a sudden, he feels these two fists jab into the back of his back that sent him flying, spread eagle. He did the motion in church, literally flying, spread eagle. Like, just imagine a squirrel flying through the sky, and that's the gesture he gave us in court while testifying. Spread eagle, which landed him in the snow face down. Now, he doesn't remember Gwyneth Paltrow also falling with him. He just remembers flying and then landing in the snow face down. And then he heard some commotion and people were yelling at him, he claims. So he was like trying to he was trying to reconcile what was going on. He's like, I heard a man that was yelling at me, and I didn't know if this man was a husband or a boyfriend. Like, he must have been a husband or he must have been a boyfriend. A lot of details went into this, right? And he was saying that there was just a lot of detail in terms of what he remembered in those moments, which was interesting considering, he's claiming that this accident gave him a traumatic brain injury. And my questions from it were kind of like, well, one, if she came at you so fast and hard, so fast and furious, and her fist jabbed into your back, I would think there would be some back damage, not some brain damage. But he was even saying that, like, when he was trying to look around, he saw like sparks and he's like, oh my God, is this my eyes? Is something going on with my vision? No, that's not my eyes. This is my brain. Something's going on with the circuits in my brain. And it was just like a lot of detailed, memory of what he was thinking in those moments that to me, I was a little skeptical because I'm like, are you really going to be thinking about all of this and remembering all of this when you just suffered a brain injury? Like your brain, it sounds like that was like a concussion and an actual brain injury. And I don't know, I've never had a concussion, but I would just imagine like your brain isn't processing all of these details all at once, nor are you going to remember all of these details 7 years later in court. And again, his testimony has changed quite a bit. But again, when you have a traumatic brain injury, sometimes the details are fuzzy. And there are certain moments where it's convenient where the details are fuzzy. And then certain moments where he remembers flying through the air like a squirrel, like Superman. So he says that when he heard this man yelling, and he wasn't clear if it was a boyfriend or a husband, he wasn't sure what it was, but he was like, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. He whispered, I'm sorry, because he didn't know what else to say. But I'm also like, you whispered, I'm sorry, but weren't you face down in the snow? And you said that they just basically left you for death in the snow. Very bizarre, right? But he's giving us this detailed recollection of what he remembers. And he remembers just barely being able to whisper and mutter the words, I'm sorry, even though he claims to have been face down in the snow. So he was disoriented. He didn't really know what happened. All of this is basically going off of what his friend Ramon, Mr. Ramon, is testifying in court. So it sounds like there was some sort of accident. I don't know how much of this accident Mr. Sanderson remembers or how much he wants to remember, but it sounds like a lot of what he's going off of is his friend, Mr. Ramon, who was about 40 feet behind them and claims to have witnessed the accident and claims he saw exactly what happened. And he's the only eyewitness to the actual collision. I don't know if I trust Mr. Ramon because Ramon's testimony and Sanderson's testimony definitely have discrepancies. They have differences where, it doesn't, like, Mr. Sanderson is over here claiming he was thinking about, he was thinking that he had an injury in his brain and he heard a man yelling at him and he wasn't sure if it was the husband or if it was the boyfriend, and he was saying, I'm sorry, but he didn't have the energy to muster, I'm sorry. And then Mr. Ramon was saying, oh, when I was the first one on the scene. I witnessed the accident. When I got there, he didn't even know his name. He couldn't even tell us what his name was. So it's like, was he super confused that he didn't even know his name? Or was he able to kind of reconcile what was going on and issue a whispered apology in the moment? Lots of discrepancies, Also, medical experts, including Mr. Sanderson's own medical experts last week, claimed that he did have 4 broken ribs, but they claimed that the only way for him to have had those 4 broken ribs was to have been caused by his arm when he actually hit the snow. So he would have had to have fallen on his arm, and not what Mr. Sanderson is claiming, that he flew like, a squirrel in the sky, spread eagle, and landed in the snow. So that's not going to break your ribs. Like, there would have to be some sort of pressure, usually probably caused by the arm, and some sort of outside force that smashed you into your arm into the snow, which is what makes Gwyneth Paltrow's account a little more believable. So it sounds like he's really just going based off of what his friend Ramon is saying, but I don't know if they've compared that many notes because some of their stories doesn't add up. And as we remember, Gwyneth Paltrow testified on Friday, and her testimony, she claims that what Mr. Ramon and what Mr. Sanderson, their version of events, is not what actually went down. She's claiming that he's the one that crashed into her and knocked them both down, which is when she then fell on top of him, which makes sense because if her body weight fell on top of his as a result of him knocking into her, then she would have fell on top of him, and that would have led him to fall on his arm, and that would have broken his rib. So that medically makes a lot more sense in my mind if I were on the jury. She got up, she was pissed, she was like, you crashed into my fucking back, and she was like annoyed by it. She said that it wasn't a sharp hit. She said that it was a little more dull. She said that she remembers him sliding in between his skis sliding in between her legs, and then they both fell over. The reason that this is important, because that would naturally be like, well, then she fell on him, she broke his ribs, that's why he's suing her. No, in this case, when you're on the ski slopes and when there is a negligence case like this, whoever is at the bottom, whoever's towards the bottom of the slope has the right of way. So whoever else crashed into them, similar to like a car crash, right? So like if you crash into somebody from behind, the person behind is the one that's responsible for the actual crash, even if the person that caused the collision got injured as well. They're still the ones at fault. They're the ones that, are the negligent party in this case. So Sanderson's claiming Gwyneth Paltrow crashed into him. Paltrow's claiming he crashed into her. She was pissed. She's like, you crashed into my fucking back. That's when Mr. Christensen, who's her son Moses' ski instructor, he comes over to assist her and then handles the matter from there. So after Sanderson, we had Mr. Christensen then testify. And again, he was Moses' ski instructor. So he was with the family while they were skiing. And I believe he's skied with them about 3 different times, 2 times prior to this one incident. He has skied with Gwyneth and her family at the resort. And to be clear, he works for the Deer Valley Resort. He does not work for Gwyneth Paltrow personally. So we had him testify. And we had the woman that was the attendant to Mr. Sanderson after the collision when she was making sure, she was checking him out and making sure that he was okay. She testified. We heard from Snow Patrol. We heard from the Deer Valley manager. Hold that tea, because I got to give some love to my pals at Chomps. You know I love me some Chomps protein sticks, right? Well, my pals just launched 2 new flavors, limited edition, online only, available now. We have the new taco beef stick, which is delicious. It literally tastes just like a beef taco. So yummy. Give me a margarita, give me some guac, and I'm here for it. And they have the new habanero beef stick, also delicious. You know I love the jalapeno beef stick, but the habanero just adds like a whole new zing to it, a whole new spice. Both with 10 grams of protein and only 100 calories, 0 sugar. It's all the stick without the ick. And listen, like Raquel, I like a good beef stick or 2. And now we have 2 new flavors. You guys can go and give them a try. They're gluten-free, Whole30 compliant, all the good things, right? You can go to chomps.com right now. Use code ZACK20 for 20% off. That's code ZACK20 for 20% off. The new habanero, the new taco beef, both available right now, online only. So you can't get these in store, but you can use code ZACK20 for 20% off any order at chomps.com. So head on over right now. Followed by some expert witnesses from Paltrow's attorneys. Sanderson had previously tried to sue the ski resort. That got thrown out. So now here he is trying to sue Gwyneth Paltrow. So a lot of the Deer Valley staff, I guess they've already, done some of these depositions. They've already testified before. That's where a lot of this evidence that had been accumulated over the years is coming from as well. So we did see some reenactments that were animations that the defense team, which is Paltrow's team, they put together that kind of exhibit what may have happened and where everybody was placed. Definitely some budget went into that. She put a little money behind that. So, good for her. She can afford it, but yeah. And the ski instructor is very clear. Mr. Sanderson was skiing very swiftly. He was Moses's instructor, so he was with Moses. But the reason he was paying so much attention to Mr. Sanderson is because he saw Mr. Sanderson as a pretty advanced skier. And when you have somebody that's swiftly kind of skiing down the slopes, he wanted to make sure that the child that he was instructing, he was acting like a defensive driver in that sense, where he was trying to make sure he kept an eye on Mr. Sanderson or just this person that was skiing swiftly to make sure that, he kept an eye on Moses and kept his distance and made sure everybody was safe. So he didn't see the actual moment of impact. Again, the only person that claims to see the actual moment of impact is Mr. Ramon, who, again, was about 40 feet behind them. He's claiming that he saw all the moments leading up to it, and then he was not looking in that direction at that exact moment, but he does remember the aftermath, which is when he did not find Mr. Sanderson face down, spread eagle on the snow. He found Mr. Sanderson underneath Gwyneth Paltrow as the 2 of them were intertwined with each other on the ground, which again makes sense with what Gwyneth Paltrow is claiming. He slid behind her. They were kind of like, she says, like spooning in that moment because his back was up against hers, and then they fell over. Whitney, the attendant who later helped Mr. Sanderson, said that there was no need for her to call an ambulance. He appeared fine for the most part. She did not believe that there was any head injury or any concussion based off of her observations from him and the reports that were reviewed in court because she filed a report that day. She said that had it been as bad as he's claiming, that she would have absolutely called him an ambulance. And she's like, in this case, what we would do is if it seemed that bad, I would call an ambulance because that's the due diligence per our protocol. And if the client, who would be Mr. Sanderson, the skier, the person that's a client at Deer Valley, if they refuse the ambulance, then that's on them. But at least we know we did our due diligence and we can mark down in the paperwork we called an ambulance. In this case, she did not call an ambulance because she felt that there was no need to call an ambulance because he appeared fine. Mr. Sanderson, or sorry, not Mr. Sanderson, Mr. Erickson, the ski instructor, also claims that when he checked on Gwyneth and Terry Sanderson, that both said that they were fine. Neither of them reported any injuries in that moment. So that's why he didn't take it any further, because at that point he was like, oh, well, everybody says that they're okay. Everybody says that they're fine. The manager at Deer Valley is also very clear and seemingly annoyed by the plaintiff's line of questioning, which at some point was absurd, the plaintiff's attorneys. I remember at one point they had Mr. Christensen, and because Sanderson's claiming that Christensen yelled at him, because remember he said, oh, he had a whisper, I'm sorry, because a man was there yelling at him, and he thought that it was the husband, and he didn't know who it was. And so the plaintiff's attorneys were like, oh, so did you yell at him? And he's like, no, I did not yell at him. He's like, oh, you don't yell at all on the slopes? He's like, I'm typically not somebody that yells on the slopes. No. And they're like, so you've never yelled in your life? And he's like, no, I've never yelled in my life. They're like, well, what if one of your students was skiing off too far? Wouldn't you yell at them to call them to come back? And he's like, not typically, because my students don't drift off. They want to stay by their instructor. And if they do drift off, there is usually a meeting point that we all know we're going to meet each other at. So if they drift off a little too far, which is unlikely, then we'll meet them at some point. And if anything, I'll just head in their direction and, call to them, but I won't be yelling or screaming at them. And he's like, so you've never screamed before in your life, even if they drifted far away? It was just like really ridiculous, right? Paltrow's attorneys had an expert that gave us like a whole physics lecture and explained how the their expert, miscalculated the moments of the collision. He explained how the laws of physics. He explained the laws of physics. Why can't I talk today, damn it? He explained the laws of physics and also explained how he analyzed both Gwyneth Paltrow's testimony and Mr. Ramon's testimony. And according to the laws of physics, Gwyneth Paltrow's testimony is the only one that actually makes sense with the actual aftermath and with the actual injuries that occurred. So he did the whole formula. He showed it all for the attorney. It was a lot of math. I couldn't keep up. We had a brain injury expert that came out. He did a lot of talking that I didn't really understand, but he also kind of laid out the point that some of the symptoms that people were seeing when they claimed that after the accident, Terry Sanderson started to become angrier. His behavior had changed. This expert claims that the pre-existing conditions that Terry Sanderson had prior to the collision, those were like he was already headed down a spiral that was leading to these results that comes with old age. So he's like the symptoms and things that he was experiencing based off of his medical records prior to the collision, that adds up with where he's at right now. Like that checks out. And it also checks out that the injuries that he sustained the day of the collision healed in the correct amount of time. So he gave that testimony as well. There's also a lot of talk about this GoPro footage. And this keeps coming up because at one point there was a link that was in an email that was now revealed in court. And it was a meetup group. And the meetup group was basically a bunch of people that were there that day that were in the group that Sanderson and Ramon were in. And in that group, there's like a photo. There's a photo of from, I guess, the medical care, the urgent care, the quick care. I don't remember what it was called exactly, but like wherever they were checking him out to make sure that he was fine. There was like a photo of the woman there, Whitney, and she's like smiling with like, she's happy and, I don't know. It was weird, but there was chatter about the incident and that day and GoPro footage. And people believed that there was this GoPro footage that existed. It keeps coming up. I had a friend yesterday that texted me and she's like, oh my God, see, LOL, Gwyneth is totally guilty. They have footage of her crashing into him. And I'm like, no, that's not what the meetup group link revealed. There was talk of a possible GoPro video, but the plaintiff has said that no such video actually exists. They were merely, that Sanderson was merely speculating that there should have been GoPro footage because somebody on the slope should have had a GoPro and they should have caught what was going on. But to this day, nobody's been able to find anybody that has GoPro footage. The defense, the plaintiffs, nobody knows anybody that had a GoPro in that moment that caught the actual collision. This was all like speculation. So they thought that at one point it may have existed, that somebody on the slopes should have had a GoPro, but that was all merely conjecture. So no, there is no video evidence that actually shows the collision. All the evidence from what I've seen points to Gwyneth telling the truth and Mr. Sanderson telling an elaborated version that was likely fabricated by his friend Mr. Ramon. And to clarify, the money that he's suing for, because I do believe I put out a false statement on Monday. The punitive damages, I believe, have been reduced that he's suing for, and there's no cap on the compensatory damages. But in the opening, they did ask the jury to value their damages, Mr. Sanderson's team, to value their damages at $3.26 million. He doesn't talk about any specific damages, but it has been reported, and this is where I got confused. It's been reported that amount was reduced to $300,000. But I clarified with Emily D. Baker, and I don't know where the 300,000 number is coming from exactly, but I do know legitimate news agencies reported that number, which is where I got that number from. But in watching Emily and her YouTube videos, she claims that the documents are clearly asking for the $3 million and not this $300,000 number. So it's unclear where that miscalculation came from. So I did want to clarify. I don't know where that $300,000 number has come from. I know it's been reported, but according to the actual court documents and according to Emily D. Baker, the damages that are being asked for are still listed at $3.2 million. So we'll see. Trial set to wrap this Thursday. Hopefully we'll have some answers by then. So we'll be set and ready for our Thursday Night Live. TBD, I'll keep you posted. But I don't envision Mr. Sanderson winning this case. He lost the case against the resort. I don't envision him winning his case against Gwyneth. If anything, I think Gwyneth could possibly, I know she's unlikable, but I always like to say likability and culpability are two completely different things. She may not be the most likable. She may be a little out of touch, but she has a very good chance of winning her countersuit, which is only $1 plus her attorney's fees being paid for. So either Gwyneth wins her case or they both lose. And the jury's like, you know what, screw you both. You both were in a collision. It was an accident, whatever. But I don't think Mr. Sanderson has any legs to stand on. He lost those on the slope. But also people were making fun of her for her saying that she lost half a day of skiing. I tried to clarify this on Monday, but just to reiterate, the reason she said that she lost half a day of skiing is because in order to sue for negligence, you have to prove damages, and there has to be some sort of monetary damages. So in this case, the damages that she's claiming was she paid for a full day of skiing and she lost half a day. Therefore, she lost half of the fee that was paid that day to ski because the collision kept her from continuing to ski that day. So that's why that was brought up, and that's why she's like, I lost a half a day of skiing. But she's not suing, let's be very clear. She's not suing for that daily fee. That's not something that she's suing for. She just had to say that to lay out what the damages actually were. But she's only suing for $1 in damages, which she claims is purely symbolic.